All right, everybody, it's right about that time where legacy automakers in the U.S. are about to face a serious challenge when it comes to being able to build cars. The leader of the United Auto Workers Union, which is in charge of Ford, GM, and is also known as Chrysler, labor for the factories. He just put out a statement about 36 hours before they're potentially going to go on strike. And what he says has huge implications, not just for legacy automakers, but for the rest of the auto industry in the U.S., specifically around EVs. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
You know, Elon Musk at this point is actually trying to cut costs. He's already got a huge competitive advantage at Tesla in terms of making the EVs. And you know what the sales of the big three EVs are right now. So we're just talking about relative, you know, whether you're going to be able to compete on a relative basis with a lean and mean Tesla when you're asking for a 40% increase in wages. It just doesn't.
Yeah, competition is code word for race to the bottom. And I'm not concerned about Elon Musk building more rocket ships so he can fly into outer space and stuff. Our concern is working class people need their share of economic justice in this world. And, you know, people want to talk about class warfare and say this is class warfare. Class warfare has been going on in this country for the last 40 years. And the billionaire class has been walking away with everything while the working class has been scraping to get by paycheck to paycheck. And it's time that changes. The EV transition, billions, hundreds of billions of our taxpayer dollars are helping fund this transition. And labor cannot be left behind. Workers deserve their share of equity in this economy.
So what's interesting about that statement is that, number one, the question is sort of sidestepped, is not really answered by the union leader. He highlights that Elon Musk, the leader of Tesla, is out there sort of working on SpaceX rockets. It sort of really bypasses a very important question, I think, from CNBC, which is, if the union members were to get paid more, what does this mean when you're trying to compete with Tesla, which is not unionized, and their costs are significantly better than legacy automakers today? Now, the rhetoric from this person, which is much more akin to a politician more than anything, in my opinion, it does seem like they're not really concerned about how this impacts legacy automakers. They're just focused about making more money for the members. But of course, if there are higher costs for labor, that means higher costs for the cars. That means that your ability to stay competitive with a player that doesn't have those variables, that gulf gets larger. And so you go from automakers already being behind to even being more behind, because when you think about a car, what's the number one thing people look for? It's cost. It's how much it's going to cost me as a buyer to buy a car. And this function right here, this variable, is going to increase that cost to the end customer.
Sean, just looking at the numbers, you mentioned that labor makes up 5 to 8% of the cost of a car. If you increase labor by 40%, then your costs go up to 7 to 11.2% of the cost of the car, just moving on a bigger portion of some of those things. The other issue you're dealing with is you're asking for a shorter work week. I understand your argument that the CEOs are making much more money and that's not fair, that the rest of you aren't. Would you be satisfied if they gave back some of those raises and then say, therefore, we would take a smaller pay increase?
Not at all, because that's just a shell game. I mean, our workers, let me explain this, I guess, to be as clear as I can about this. Our wages have went backwards since 2007, 16 years ago. When a worker hired in and was promoted to full-time, they are $10 an hour behind in today's wages. In 2023, when you hire in and get promoted to full-time, you are making $10 an hour less than you were making in 2007. It's unacceptable. Inflation hasn't slowed down. Price of everything's went up astronomically since 2007. Our purchasing power has been severely weakened. And so not at all. And that's really not what this is all about. I mean, at the end of the day, they could, I'll go back to this, they could double our wages, not raise the price of vehicles, and still make billions in profits.
Now, I will give credit to the union leader. He makes great points here that automakers that supposedly are taking care of their employees are actually paying their folks less money as there's more inflation and the economy is getting better. And as GM exited the economic recession that we had in 2007, they have record profits. Their CEO is getting paid record numbers, and their folks are getting paid less money. So from that perspective, it makes perfect sense. However, it really highlights just how poorly run these legacy automakers have been. As much as some folks might want to dismiss how popular EVs are going to be in their specific areas, the trends are extremely clear. And what this graph really shows is that companies like Chevy and Ford, when they've had, let's say, 10 to, 14, 15 years to ramp up their factories for the new mode of transportation, they're lagging significantly behind the leader in this space, which is Tesla. Tesla had about 390,000 new EV registrations in the United States for that first half of the year with July. Then you have Chevy in second and Ford in third, about 1/10 of what Tesla sells in the same region. And think about that for a second. These companies have lagged behind tremendously for the last decade. They're paying their people less versus how they were doing before, which now means that the company has tried to squeeze every single bit of profit out of what they do. And even when they did that, if we look at Ford's, the number 3 automaker in this case on this list, Ford's EV division has lost over $1 billion in a single quarter and expecting to lose about $4.5 billion in 2023. And now these legacy automakers are in a situation where for the last, say, 15, 16 years, they haven't paid their folks, their factory workers, a fair wage to where their union leader feels happy that they have what they think they deserve. You also have a part of your business in the electric vehicle that is nowhere near where it needs to be in order to compete with the likes of Tesla and what's likely to be Chinese competition in the next 5 to 10 years, European competition potentially, new upstarts like Rivian, so on and so forth. And in addition to that, if you are playing in electric vehicles, you're losing a ton of money. And now on top of that, the United Auto Workers Union saying, you suck, we deserve more, which means you're going to have to pay even more. And your ability to make profit on a business that you should have had up and running for the last 10 years is going to get even harder. So now these legacy automakers are transitioning from a very difficult, extremely difficult situation that they're in to one that, in my opinion, is going to be impossible to overcome. And regardless of how the UAW decides to approach the strike, if they want to go on strike or they don't want to go on strike, either decision is terrible for legacy automakers. If they do strike, that's factories that are shut down, they can't produce cars, they eat a ton of costs, they eat into their cash reserves, they have to potentially take out more loans to try and keep themselves afloat. And if they don't strike and they get something that's closer to what they're looking for, their costs go up and they're going to continue losing even more money on their EV segment, which is becoming the preferred mode of transportation, not just in the United States, but globally. And the folks that are doubting this, I really think they're not looking at the numbers. They're not looking at the trends. They're not looking at this chart that I had previously up that I'll throw up right now, where Tesla has 60% plus of the market share in the United States. And what's even worse is that Tesla is not playing in 2 giant segments in the United States. They're not playing in pickup trucks right now. With the Cybertruck, they will in about a month. And they're not playing in the compact car / super affordable segment with a $25,000 compact, which is likely going to hit the roads in 2025. So they have this commanding lead with a cost advantage without 2 of the largest segments in the United States. I've tried to remain positive for these legacy automakers. I still hope that they survive. In no way, shape, or form do I want them to fail, but the writing is on the wall. Even if there's a modest wage increase for the union workers, this just means additional costs that these legacy automakers have to bear. And we know how convoluted their systems are. We know how much bureaucracy there are in large corporations. We know what happens when a union is involved with a company. It's going to make everything more difficult to put in place. Regardless if it's fair or not fair to the workers, it makes business more difficult when you're trying to fight against a company that's way ahead of you. You have to overcome obstacles that this company, in Tesla as an example, doesn't have to overcome. But it's painful to watch this develop for legacy automakers, and it's no wonder they have such a low multiple in the stock market. I'll try to stay positive for the electric vehicle transition for these folks. I'll try to stay positive for these specific companies. I still feel like there are specific leaders like Jim Farley from Ford who are trying their hardest to make something happen, but the obstacles are too great. As they come to fruition, as we're seeing here with the union variable now coming into play, I think it's going to paint a darker and darker picture. And I know some of us are doubtful on that happening, but I encourage you to just look at the data for the last 5 to 10 years and look at how much attention Tesla is gathering and look at what's going to happen in the next 2 years as they release a pickup truck and a compact car. I just encourage you to look at the data and draw your own conclusions. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.